She didn't marry him for love. She married him for revenge. The man she called her husband had once been partners with her brother. When that partnership ended, her brother died broke and disgraced. She blamed him for everything. So she smiled at charity galas, knelt before his mother calling her Iyami with respect, insisted they all lived together as one family. Everyone said she was perfect. Then her husband left for America, and she locked his mother and his son in a shed and fed them like animals for 3 weeks, recording fake videos and sending cheerful texts while they begged for help through locked doors that no one heard. When he came home early and found them, she laughed and said this was justice. This is the story of evil that wore a wedding ring, and by the time anyone noticed, it had already destroyed everything it touched. The zinc shed hadn't been opened in 3 months. Inside, darkness pressed against rusted walls. Outside, a woman stood at the back door of a Lekki mansion, her hand touching the padlock. She looked over her shoulder. No one was watching. Her lips moved in a whisper. 3 weeks. That's all I need. This is the story of how evil walked through the front door wearing a smile, how a family nearly died in their own home, and how a billionaire learned that money can't buy you eyes to see. His name was Akin Adiwale, 42 years old, a logistics king who connected Nigerian exporters to American ports. His face appeared on business panels in Atlanta and New York. Churches quoted him on Sundays. Investors called him brilliant. Workers called him fair. But none of them knew what was about to happen in his home. He was born poor in Ibadan. His father left when he was 5. His mother, Mima Adamide, raised him alone. She sold tomatoes in the market, woke up at 4 every morning, counted coins to pay his school fees, never complained, never stopped believing he would be something. And he became something, built an empire from nothing, made his first million at 30, his first billion at 38. But 3 years ago, his wife died. Illness took her fast. Left him with a 7-year-old boy named Dara. Left him lonely. Left him vulnerable. That's when Temi appeared. She was 34. Polished. Educated. Knew how to say the right things at the right time. They met at a charity event in Victoria Island. She talked about logistics like she understood it. Laughed at his jokes. Listened when he spoke about missing his wife. Everyone loved her. Especially when she insisted that Mima Adamide and Dara move into the compound. We should be one family, she said, kneeling before the old woman, calling her Iyami with both hands pressed together in respect. The wedding happened 8 months later. White lace and live music. Dignitaries smiling for cameras. People said they looked perfect together. But perfect is just another word for performance. The compound sat in Lekki Phase 1. Modern architecture. Manicured gardens. Marble floors that reflected chandelier light. Security cameras on every corner. Except one. The back area. Near the old zinc structure that came with the property. Akin never asked about it. Temi called it temporary storage. Mima Adamide noticed things others didn't. How Temi's smile disappeared the moment her son left a room. How her voice changed when she spoke to Dara. Small things. Easy to dismiss. The boy noticed too. Auntie Temi looks at me funny, he told his grandmother one night. Hush, Mama whispered. Don't cause trouble. That was her mistake. Thinking silence would keep the peace. Now, on a Tuesday morning in March, Akin stood in the foyer with his suitcase. 3-week trip to America. Port expansion deal. Meetings in Atlanta and New York. Everything he'd built depended on this. Don't worry about home, Temi said, adjusting his tie. I'll take care of everything. He kissed her forehead. Hugged his mother, lifted Dara onto his shoulders one last time. Be good for Auntie Temi, he said. The boy nodded but said nothing. Mima Adamide watched her son drive away. Watched the gate close. Watched Temi's face change the second the car disappeared from view. Come, Temi said. Her voice was different now. Colder. We need to talk about new rules. Something in the air shifted. Mima felt it in her chest. Dara grabbed her hand. Temi walked toward the back of the house, toward the zinc shed. The padlock waited in her pocket. She had 3 weeks. No husband. No witnesses. Just an old woman and a boy who didn't belong. And evil, when given time and privacy, always shows its true face. Before we continue this story, tell us, where are you watching from right now? And if stories about hidden evil and the cost of silence matter to you, If you believe truth should always find light, then stay with us. This journey will break your heart, but it might also save someone's life. Subscribe, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about trust. The plane lifted off toward Atlanta. In the compound, Temmie unlocked the shed door for the first time in months. Dust, rust, darkness. She smiled. Plenty of time, she whispered. The phone went missing on the second day. Mema Ademaide woke up and reached for it, but her fingers found only empty space where the small Nokia had sat for 10 years. She looked around the room, confused, when a voice came from the doorway. Looking for something. The younger woman stood there with a calm smile that didn't reach her eyes. My phone, I wanted to call. It stopped working, so I took it for repairs. The answer came smooth and easy, like she'd practiced it. You'll get it back soon. But soon never came, and the old woman knew better than to ask again. 48 hours after her son left for America, his wife called all the staff to the kitchen and stood at the head of the table like someone preparing for war. The cook looked nervous, the gardener stared at his feet, and only Emeka the security guard dared to meet her gaze. We're making changes for efficiency, she announced, letting the words hang in the air. Mema Ademaide and the boy will eat separately now, no more main dining room disrupting the household flow. The cook opened her mouth and closed it again without speaking, while the others shifted uncomfortably but said nothing at all. Their meals will be simplified with smaller portions at later times, she continued, then looked around the room with eyes that warned against questions. Loyalty is rewarded here, but gossip is punished, so remember that. The message was clear enough: watch everything, say nothing, or lose your job and your family's survival along with it. The old woman tried to understand what she'd done wrong, because 2 days ago she ate breakfast at the long marble table with jollof rice and plantain and fresh orange juice, but now she sat alone in a small back room staring at cold yam and watery soup that tasted like punishment. Is something wrong? She asked that afternoon, keeping her voice soft and apologetic. Nothing's wrong, I'm just managing better than before. I don't mean to cause trouble. The younger woman's eyes turned to ice. Then don't question me. She nodded and apologized and went quiet, because that's what good people do when they want to keep the peace. But endurance in the face of evil is just another word for dying slowly while pretending everything is fine. The boy noticed the changes before anyone said a word, because his breakfast came 2 hours late with only cold bread and no eggs or fruit, and he wasn't allowed at the big table anymore but had to eat standing in the kitchen corner like he'd committed some crime he couldn't name. Your father spoiled you, but that ends now, she told him one morning with a voice that cut like glass. His eyes filled with tears. Did I do something bad? She looked down at him with something that might have been hatred or disgust or both. Not yet, but children like you always do. Children like you. The words hung in the air with a meaning he was too young to understand but old enough to fear, and he wanted to ask what she meant but didn't dare open his mouth again. Things disappeared fast after that, starting with the grandmother's phone and then the landline in her room during maintenance that never ended, and visitors got turned away at the gate because Madam said no guests this month, and the house manager who'd worked there for 5 years was suddenly fired because they were downsizing staff. Then came the accusation that changed everything. My earrings are missing, the wife announced that evening, talking about expensive gold ones she'd left on her dresser. She turned to the boy with accusation already written on her face. Were you in my room? He shook his head so hard it hurt. No, Auntie. Don't lie to me. He doesn't lie, the grandmother said, standing up with all the strength her old bones could manage. He would never. You defend him because you know what he is. The room went silent with those words hanging like poison in the air, because she didn't say who he was but what he was, like he wasn't human but something broken and wrong and dirty. Emeka watched from the hallway and saw the old woman's shoulders drop under the weight of cruelty, saw the boy's tears fall onto the floor, and wanted to speak up but couldn't because he had 3 children and a wife and bills and rent that wouldn't pay themselves. That evening the husband called from Atlanta with his tired face filling the video screen, and his wife answered with a perfect smile and perfect voice saying everything was wonderful while the grandmother appeared briefly in the background forcing her mouth to curve upward. Mema, you look tired, are you okay? He asked with concern in his voice. Before she could answer, his wife stepped between them. She's just adjusting, you know how elders are with change. He believed it because why wouldn't he? and the call ended with him saying he'd be home in 2.5 weeks, and when the screen went dark his wife's smile disappeared like it had never existed. "Tomorrow you'll eat your meals outside," she said quietly to the old woman and the boy. "Fresh air is healthy." Through the window behind her, the zinc shed door stood open just a crack, but wide enough to see the darkness waiting inside. The metal bowl hit the concrete floor with a sound that made the boy jump. "This is where you'll eat from now on," she said, standing in the doorway of the zinc shed with morning light behind her making her look like a shadow with a voice. The old woman stared at the bowl on the ground, at the rust stains on the walls, at the small window that barely let in air, and her throat went tight with a fear she couldn't name but could feel in every bone. "Please, there must be another way." "There is, but you don't deserve it." The younger woman turned and walked out, and the sound of the lock clicking into place felt like the end of something that could never be put back together. The boy looked up at his grandmother with eyes too young to understand cruelty, but old enough to recognize it when it stood in front of him wearing expensive clothes and speaking in calm voices. "Grandma, why does Auntie Temmie hate us?" She pulled him close and felt his small body trembling against hers while her mind searched for answers that wouldn't break his spirit completely. "Sometimes people forget to be kind, but we'll be okay." But she wasn't sure if that was true anymore, because this wasn't poverty like she'd known in Ibadan when she sold tomatoes in the market and counted coins to feed her son. This was something else entirely, something that felt like hatred dressed up as order and called itself justice. The food came in that dented metal bowl twice a day, and they sat on cold concrete eating with their fingers while the younger woman watched through the small window with a face that showed nothing at all, not anger or satisfaction or even disgust, just blank acceptance like she was watching animals feed because that's what she'd decided they were. On the second day the portions got smaller, and on the third day the food arrived cold and congealed, and the old woman stopped eating altogether and pushed her share toward the boy who shook his head and said, "You have to eat too, Grandma," with tears running down his cheeks. "I'm not hungry," she lied, because love sometimes means giving away the last bit of food you have and pretending you don't need it. The boy found a piece of charcoal in the corner of the shed and used it to draw on the zinc wall, his small hands creating a picture of a house and a woman and a man and a boy and a grandmother all holding hands like families do in the drawings that children make when they still believe the world is good. The younger woman saw it later that evening and stood there staring at it with her jaw tight and her hands clenched. Then she grabbed a rag and scrubbed it away so hard her knuckles went white. But the next morning the boy drew it again, because children understand resistance in ways that adults have forgotten. 1 week into her son's trip to America, the old woman developed a cough that rattled in her chest from cold nights in the damp shed, and the boy stopped singing the little songs he used to make up and stopped drawing as much and just sat quiet with his head on her shoulder like he was trying to disappear. The younger woman noticed their decline and felt something she told herself was satisfaction, thinking 2 more weeks and he won't even recognize them when he comes home. But what she didn't know was that her husband in New York had started feeling an unease he couldn't explain, a tightness in his chest during video calls when his wife's smile looked perfect, but his mother's eyes looked wrong. And though he pushed the feeling away because he trusted his wife and needed to focus on business, some part of him had started to wake up. Late that night the security guard walked past the shed on his rounds and heard the old woman praying softly in Yoruba, asking God to protect the child and let truth find light. And he stopped with his fist clenched and his heart torn between conscience and fear of losing the job that fed his own 3 children. Inside the main house the younger woman lay awake staring at a photograph on her nightstand, a picture of a man who looked like her standing beside a younger version of herself, and she whispered, "I'm doing this for you," to his frozen smile. But in the darkness her face showed something that wasn't grief or love or even revenge anymore, just obsession that had forgotten why it started and only remembered how to hurt. The crying woke him at midnight. The security guard sat up in his post near the gate and listened to the sound drifting from the back of the compound, a child's voice saying, "Grandma, please don't cry," and an old woman's voice trying to soothe him with, "Hush, my child, we must be quiet," even though her own voice was breaking. He had 3 children of his own sleeping in a small flat in Surulere, and his hands started shaking because he knew what it meant to hear a child beg like that, knew what it cost to turn away from suffering just to keep a paycheck coming. 10 days had passed since the husband left for America, and in those 10 days the guard had watched things happen that made his stomach turn, but fear had kept his mouth shut because good jobs in Lagos were hard to find and his wife was pregnant with their 4th child. But that night something inside him shifted when he heard the old woman coughing so hard it sounded like her lungs were tearing apart, and he remembered something the husband had once said during a conversation about business ethics, that good men don't stand by when evil is happening right in front of them. The next morning he watched through the security cameras as the wife walked to the shed carrying a metal bowl, and the old woman tried to stand up to receive it but collapsed halfway, her body hitting the concrete floor while the boy screamed for help. The wife arrived at the shed door looking annoyed rather than concerned and said stop being dramatic in that calm voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, and when the old woman whispered, "Please, I need medicine," the response came back cold and sharp like a blade. "You need discipline. That's your real problem." The guard made a decision then that would change everything, because that afternoon while the wife went to her spa appointment in Ikoyi, he bought fever medicine with money from his own pocket and waited until the compound was quiet before approaching the shed window. He slipped the medicine and a bottle of water through the narrow opening and saw tears streaming down the old woman's face as she whispered, "God bless you." And all he could say was, "I can't do more. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," before walking away with guilt burning in his chest. The boy watched this happen and learned something important that day, that even in the darkest places some people still choose kindness over safety, though he was too young to understand why adults had to choose between the two. Meanwhile, the wife was busy creating lies to send to her husband in New York, recording video messages using old footage that showed the old woman supposedly resting peacefully in her room, sending cheerful texts saying everyone misses you but we're managing beautifully. Even having the cook prepare a nice meal just to photograph it with a caption that read Mema's favorite, jollof rice and chicken, when the reality was watery eba eaten from a metal bowl on a concrete floor. The cook had seen enough by then and finally spoke up that evening saying, "Madam, this is not right," with her voice trembling but determined, and the wife's eyes turned to ice as she stepped closer and said, "You're fired. Pack your things now," without even blinking. "Please, I need this job," the cook begged, but the answer came back like a door slamming shut. "You should have thought about that before questioning me." The other staff watched this happen and the message was clear enough: speak up and lose everything you have. So they stayed silent and looked away and let evil continue because fear makes cowards of people who might otherwise be brave. That same afternoon the husband called unexpectedly from New York right in the middle of the shed mealtime, and his wife had to run from the shed door into the house to compose herself before answering with a perfect smile and telling him she's at the market with the boy. You know how she loves going out. And he believed it because why wouldn't he trust his own wife telling him about his own home? But that close call made her angry enough to escalate the punishment, announcing that night that they would now sleep in the shed permanently with just an old mat on the concrete floor and one thin blanket for both of them, and the old woman's spirit finally started to crack under the weight of cruelty that had no end in sight. Late that night the guard watched from his post as the wife locked the shed door and walked away, and he pulled out his old Nokia phone and searched for how to report elder abuse Lagos and found a number for an attorney, but his thumb hovered over the call button while fear fought with conscience in his chest. Tomorrow, he told himself, tomorrow I'll be brave. But inside the shed the old woman's fever was burning hotter and the boy whispered, "Should we pray for Daddy to come home?" just before her body went completely limp and hit the floor with a sound that made the boy scream, "Help, somebody help," while pounding on the door with his small fists. The guard heard the screaming and his body froze, and inside the main house the wife heard it too and turned up the TV volume while pouring herself wine as if a child's terror was just background noise that didn't concern her. But this time the guard's hand reached for his phone and he didn't hesitate, because tomorrow had just become right now and a woman was dying and a child was screaming and some choices can't wait until morning. He dialed. The attorney answered on the third ring at 11 o'clock at night, and the voice on the other end was shaking so badly she almost couldn't understand the words coming through. "I need to report something terrible," the security guard said into his Nokia phone while sitting in his post at the gate, watching the main house where all the lights were off except one window where the wife was probably sleeping without a care in the world. "Tell me what's happening," the attorney said, because she worked late taking emergency calls from people who had nowhere else to turn, and something in his voice told her this wasn't someone looking for attention but someone who'd seen something that was tearing him apart. He explained everything in a rush of words that kept tripping over each other, about an elderly woman and a child locked in a shed behind a mansion in Lekki, about food served in metal bowls on concrete floors, about a wife who smiled for video calls while her husband's family was dying slowly just 50 meters from where she slept in silk sheets. "Where is the property owner?" she asked, already taking notes. Traveling in America. He doesn't know any of this is happening. His wife is doing everything. I need evidence. Can you document anything? His hands were shaking so badly when he tried to take photos that the first 3 came out blurred and useless, but he steadied himself against the gate post and tried again, capturing images of the shed from a distance, recording audio of the boys crying that carried across the compound in the dark, taking pictures of the metal bowl with food scraps still inside that he'd seen the wife carry away that evening. He sent everything to her number via WhatsApp and waited while the 3 dots appeared showing she was typing. Then her response came back. This is enough to start. I'm contacting authorities. Morning came with the old woman barely conscious and burning with fever so high the boy was hysterical, thinking his grandmother was going to die right there on the concrete floor. And the wife realized she had a problem because if death happened here, questions would follow and police would investigate and her husband would come home early and everything would be ruined. She made a phone call to a private doctor she'd heard about through certain circles, the kind of man who treated patients who needed discretion more than ethics, and when he arrived at the compound she led him to the shed without explaining why an elderly woman was being kept in conditions that made his face go pale. He examined the patient while the wife pulled him aside afterward with her hand on his arm and her voice sweet as honey saying, "Doctor, this is complicated, a family situation, you understand." And she slid an envelope thick with cash into his pocket before adding, "Discretion is appreciated." He looked at the money, looked back at the old woman lying on a thin mat with an 4 drip in her arm, and whatever conscience he might have had lost the battle against whatever debts he needed to pay. So he took the envelope and said she needs antibiotics and fluids and rest, without asking why rest meant a concrete floor. But while he was inserting the 4 drip, the old woman started speaking in her delirium, her fever-soaked brain letting out secrets she'd kept locked away for years, saying words like Simeon and I tried to tell him, and the boy's father, and not his son, while the wife's head snapped around and her face drained of all color. "What did you say?" she demanded. But the old woman kept rambling about truth and lies and a man named Simeon who'd been her son's business partner years ago, and the doctor didn't fully understand what he was hearing, but he saw the wife's expression change into something that looked like triumph mixed with rage. "She's hallucinating. Ignore it," she told him. But she knew it wasn't hallucination at all. It was confirmation of something she'd suspected for years, and now she had the ultimate weapon to destroy not just her husband's family but his entire sense of who he was. The boy sat in the corner of the shed listening to all of this and not understanding what the words meant but knowing somehow they were important, filing them away in his memory the way children do when adults speak in code thinking no one is listening. That afternoon the husband called from the airport in Atlanta sounding tired and stressed, and his wife answered with her voice strained but controlled, telling him she was just exhausted from managing everything alone, and when he said 1 more week and I'm home she surprised him by saying, "Actually take your time. We're adjusting well," which planted the first real seed of doubt in his mind because what wife tells her husband to stay away longer? Meanwhile, the attorney in Lagos was filing formal complaints with government offices that moved like molasses, providing evidence that should have sparked immediate action, but instead got buried under bureaucracy and promises to look into it. And she realized that by the time officials moved, a woman might be dead and a child might be damaged beyond repair. So she made a decision that broke protocol but might save lives, researching the husband's company online and finding his contact information in America, drafting an email with the subject line "Urgent. Your family needs you," and hovering her finger over the send button while Lagos traffic roared outside her small office in Ikeja. She thought about the photos showing hollow eyes and tear-stained faces, about a security guard risking everything to do what was right, about an old woman who'd raised her son from nothing and now lay dying in a shed while that son slept thousands of miles away trusting the wrong person. She clicked send. The email traveled through cyberspace across oceans and continents, arriving in Atlanta where a phone buzzed once in the middle of the night beside a sleeping man who had no idea that tomorrow morning when he opened that message, everything he thought he knew about his life would shatter into pieces he couldn't put back together. The email arrived at 6 in the morning while he was drinking coffee in his Atlanta hotel room, and the subject line made his hand freeze halfway to his mouth. "Urgent. Your family needs you." He didn't recognize the sender's name, but something about those 5 words made his heart start beating faster. And when he opened the message and started reading, his blood turned cold because the attorney was describing his own compound in Lekki, his own zinc shed, an elderly woman and a child locked inside with photographs attached as proof. His fingers shook so badly he almost dropped the phone trying to open the attachments. And when the images loaded, he saw his property from an angle he recognized, the shed he'd barely thought about in months, a metal bowl on concrete, and through the small window a shape that could only be his mother. This couldn't be real, his mind insisted. This had to be some kind of scam or extortion attempt by people trying to ruin his business deal. But the GPS coordinates at the bottom of the email matched his address exactly, and the date stamp on the photos said 3 days ago. He called his wife immediately and got nothing but silence, then voicemail. Then he called again and again until his hands were shaking with something he hadn't felt since he was a poor boy in a barden watching his mother count coins for his school fees, the feeling of being completely powerless while people you love are suffering. He tried the house landline and got a recorded message saying the number was disconnected. Tried his mother's phone and heard number not in service. Tried the house manager and found the number had been changed, and with each failed call the panic grew tighter around his chest like a rope being pulled from both ends. Finally he called the security guard's phone and heard a trembling voice say, "Sir, please come home please," before the line went dead. And he knew with absolute certainty that everything in that email was true and his wife had been lying to him for weeks while his family was dying in a shed 50 meters from where she slept. At the compound his wife saw the security guard on the phone and realized instantly what was happening, walking up to him with fury in her eyes asking, "Who did you call?" in a voice so cold it could have frozen water. "No one, madam, just checking with," he started to say, but she cut him off with, "You're lying, you're fired, leave now." And when he tried to protest she shouted for other security to remove him from the property, but he'd already done what mattered most because across the ocean her husband was canceling every meeting and booking the next flight home. Inside the shed the old woman's fever had broken, but she was so weak she could barely sit up, and the boy noticed that the security guard hadn't come by with medicine or water and asked, "Grandma, where is Uncle Emeka?" And through the walls they heard shouting and understood that the man who'd tried to help them was being punished for his kindness. "It's my fault," the boy cried. "Everyone who helps us gets hurt." But his grandmother pulled him close and said, "No, child, you are never the fault," even though her voice was barely a whisper and her bones felt like they might break from the weight of holding him. The wife spent the rest of that day trying to erase evidence, scrubbing the shed walls and removing the metal bowl and calling the doctor to threaten him into silence, planning to move them back into the house before her husband returned so she could claim they'd been there all along. But in her panic she forgot about the charcoal drawings the boy had made, faint marks still visible on the zinc showing a family holding hands and words that said, "Daddy, come home." 13 hours later at 4 in the morning Lagos time, a plane landed at Murtala Mohammed International Airport, and a man who'd spent the entire flight remembering every moment he'd been too busy to notice suffering rushed through customs and took the first taxi he could find, telling the driver Lekki Phase 1, as fast as possible while his heart hammered against his ribs. At the compound his wife woke in the dark and checked her phone finding no messages from her husband, which meant he was still in America and she still had time, and she walked to the shed to bring their breakfast. But when she opened the door she found the old woman standing for the first time in days with the boy holding her hand, and they weren't cowering anymore but waiting like they knew something she didn't. "His coming isn't he?" the old woman said clearly, and before his wife could answer they all heard it, the sound of car tires on gravel and a door slamming and footsteps walking toward the back of the house, and when she turned around she saw her husband standing there in the pre-dawn light staring at the shed door and at her and at the two people behind her, and the world stopped breathing while truth prepared to tear everything apart. He saw the concrete floor first, then the thin mat crumpled in the corner, then the metal bowl someone had forgotten to remove, and his brain refused to connect what his eyes were showing him because this was his property and these were his family members and the two things couldn't exist in the same reality. His mother sat against the zinc wall so thin her bones showed through her clothes, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, and the boy stood beside her with hollow cheeks and trembling hands clutching hers like she was the only thing keeping him alive in a world that had tried to erase them both. Nobody spoke for 10 seconds that stretched into forever while morning light crept through the small window and showed rust on the walls and stains on the concrete, and the locked door his wife was still holding open like she'd been caught doing something she couldn't explain away with words. "This isn't," she started, but he raised one hand and said stop in a voice so quiet it could have been a whisper except it cut through the air like something sharp enough to draw blood. "You don't understand what I've been dealing with." She tried again, but his eyes finally met hers and the question came out slow and clear. "Did you lock them in here?" She hesitated for half a second, and that was answer enough, But he needed to hear it spoken aloud, so he asked again, louder this time. Asked it so loud the words echoed across the compound and made birds fly out of trees. "Did you lock them in here?" His mother collapsed then because hearing his voice broke whatever strength she'd been using to stay upright for the boy's sake, and she fell to her knees sobbing, my son," while he rushed past his wife and caught her before she hit the ground, feeling how light she was, how her body was just bones wrapped in skin where there should have been weight and substance and life. "Memo, I'm here now," he said, but the boy was standing frozen like he wasn't sure this was real or just another dream that would end with the door locking again, and when he whispered "Daddy," it came out like a question about whether safety was possible anymore. He opened his other arm and the boy ran into it and started sobbing uncontrollably, saying, "I tried to be good. I tried so hard to be good." And his heart broke into pieces hearing that, because children shouldn't have to earn the right not to be tortured. "You did nothing wrong, nothing," he told the boy while his wife backed away from the shed trying to rebuild her defense in real time, saying they needed discipline and structure and he'd left her in charge of a difficult situation. "You locked my mother in a shed like an animal," he said, standing up still holding the boy, and when she tried to justify it by saying the old woman was undermining her and protecting that boy, he cut her off with "His name is Dara, he's 7 years old." That's when she threw the bomb that was supposed to destroy him, saying, "He's not even yours, his Simeon's. Your precious mother knew and she's been lying to you for years." And the silence that followed was the kind that happens when entire worlds collapse. "Is this true?" he asked his mother and saw the answer in her face before she said, "I wanted to tell you but," and his brain tried to process that his business partner had betrayed him and his wife had betrayed him and even his mother had kept secrets that changed everything he thought he knew about his own family. "Simeon was my brother," his wife said then with venom pouring out. "You destroyed him and took his business and left him with nothing, and I married you to make you feel what he felt, loss and betrayal and humiliation. This was justice." "No," he said slowly. "This was evil." Car tires crunched on gravel outside, and the attorney appeared with 2 police officers who took one look at the scene and understood immediately what kind of crime they were witnessing, and when they asked who was responsible, he pointed at his wife and said her. She tried to fight it, saying she was just managing her household, but the attorney listed the charges like she was reading from a script she'd memorized: elder abuse, child endangerment, false imprisonment, and his wife's face finally showed something other than control, showed fear that her revenge had destroyed her instead of him. As police led her away, he turned back to the shed and saw his mother and the boy standing in the doorway with morning sun finally touching their faces, and on the wall behind them faint charcoal marks showing a family holding hands and words that said, "Daddy, come home." He had come home, but too late to stop the damage that would live in their bones forever. The paramedic looked at him with eyes that said everything before the words came out. Another week and this could have been fatal. He stood in the private hospital room, watching his mother hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed while pumping fluids into veins that had been starved for too long, and beside her the boy lay in another bed, refusing to let go of her hand even though nurses had tried to separate them for treatment. "The physical damage will heal," the doctor said, pulling him into the hallway where his mother couldn't hear the rest of the sentence. "But the psychological damage, that's something we can't fix with antibiotics and 4 drips. He sat between their beds that night holding both their hands and whispered, "I failed you both," over and over until his mother squeezed his fingers and said, "You came when it mattered." But that didn't stop the guilt from crushing his chest every time he looked at how thin they'd become. Once she was strong enough to sit up, she asked to speak with him alone, and after the nurses stepped out and the boy was sleeping, she told him everything about 8 years ago when his business partner and his wife had betrayed him in ways that created a child he'd been raising as his own without knowing the truth. "Your wife was lonely during your travels and Simeon was there during a dark time, and when she got pregnant with the boy she told me everything before she died and made me promise not to tell you because you'd already lost so much," she explained with tears running down her face. He sat silent for long minutes, processing that the boy sleeping in the next bed wasn't his blood, that the man who'd stolen from his company had also stolen his wife, that everyone he'd trusted had lied to him in one way or another. "So Simeon betrayed me, Kimi betrayed me, and you kept it hidden," he finally said, and his mother nodded and whispered, "Add me to the list of people who hurt you." But when he looked through the window at the boy who'd drawn pictures of families holding hands and written, "Daddy come home," on zinc walls, he remembered teaching him to tie his shoes and reading bedtime stories and watching him create art from nothing but charcoal and hope. "He's still my son," he said quietly, Blood doesn't change the fact that I chose to be his father, and that's stronger than biology." His mother wept with relief while across the city at Panti police station his wife sat in a cell refusing to show any remorse, telling detectives, "I did what I had to do because he destroyed my brother," as if revenge justified torture. The attorney met him in the hospital cafeteria and listed charges that would keep his wife behind bars for years if the prosecutor got what he wanted: elder abuse, child endangerment, false imprisonment, assault, and possible fraud from finances she'd been stealing while pretending to manage the household. "We'll need statements from everyone, including you and your mother and the staff," the attorney said, and he answered, "Whatever it takes. She doesn't walk away from this." Staff members who'd watched in silence started coming forward one by one, the fired cook saying, "I tried to speak up, but she fired me for questioning her." The gardener admitting, "I heard crying from the shed many nights but was too afraid to report it." And only the security guard who'd finally called for help seemed to feel the weight of having acted when others stayed silent. When the boy woke up that afternoon, he asked, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" And his heart broke hearing the child still worried about being punished for surviving. So he pulled him close and said, "I chose to be your father, and that's stronger than blood. Nothing changes the fact that I want you forever." News spread fast through Lagos blogs and social media with headlines like "Lekki Shed Horror," "How Wealth Hid Cruelty," and business associates calling to either express support or distance themselves from scandal. But he made the decision not to hide what happened, because if his story helped one person speak up about abuse, then the shame was worth it. 3 days later, the attorney called saying the prosecutor is pushing for no bail due to flight risk and severity of charges. And when his mother asked what happens to her now, he answered, "Justice happens, real justice." While knowing that in courtrooms across the city his wife was learning that revenge destroys the person seeking it more than anyone else. The judge looked at the photographs for a full minute without speaking, images of the zinc shed and the metal bowl and the doctor's report showing how close death had come, and when he finally looked up his voice was calm but final. "Bail is denied. Defendant remanded in custody pending trial." She broke then in a way she hadn't broken when police arrested her, or when her husband discovered her, or when staff testified against her. Sobbing as guards led her away, but the tears felt empty, like she was performing grief for an audience that had stopped caring whether her pain was real. Outside the courthouse, he stood before cameras and reporters and read a statement he'd written at 3 in the morning while sitting beside hospital beds. "My family suffered abuse in my home while I was away. I trusted when I should have verified, and I'm speaking publicly because silence protects abusers. So if you suspect someone is being harmed, don't wait like I did." Some business contracts got paused while companies assessed whether scandal would hurt their reputation, but others reached out with support. And one CEO called saying, "I had a similar situation and you're brave to speak," which made him realize that vulnerability wasn't weakness but the kind of strength that helped other people find their own courage. His mother was released from the hospital after 1 week with orders to rest and eat and attend therapy sessions twice weekly, and he moved her into the master bedroom suite that was largest and safest while hiring new staff who understood that family came before everything, including perfect marble floors and scheduled meal times. The boy started seeing a child therapist who used play therapy with drawings and blocks and toy figures, and slowly his personality returned like flowers growing back after a storm. Humor and curiosity and joy that had been buried under fear. And one afternoon he laughed at something silly, and the sound made his father sit down in the hallway because that laugh was proof that children can heal even from the worst things adults do to them. He ordered the shed demolished and brought his mother and the boy to watch workers tear down zinc walls and remove concrete floors. And when the boy asked, "What will you build there?" he knelt down and asked back, "What do you think we should build?" And the answer came without hesitation. "A garden with flowers so something beautiful grows there." The security guard who'd made the phone call that saved them was called to the compound and arrived nervous, thinking he was in trouble, but instead received an envelope containing 6 months' salary as bonus and a letter of commendation along with an offer to become head of security because bravery deserves reward, not punishment. Weeks passed while the attorney prepared for trial with witness testimonies and medical expert reports and psychological evaluations. And when his wife's defense tried to negotiate a plea deal, the prosecutor refused, saying the evidence is overwhelming. We proceed to trial. The trial lasted 2 weeks with photos and videos and staff members describing what they'd seen and failed to stop. And after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that surprised no one. Guilty on all counts with a sentence of 7 years imprisonment and no possibility of early parole. He watched from the courtroom gallery feeling not joy but closure, because revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just creates new ones. And what he wanted now was not to see her suffer but to make sure his family never suffered again. The day after sentencing, he stood where the shed had been with his mother beside him using a walking stick but standing tall. And when she said, "You're thinking too much," he admitted, "I'm thinking about all the people suffering in silence right now in houses that look perfect from outside." She placed her hand on his arm and said, "Then let's make sure your story reaches them. You're building a garden where cruelty once lived. Tell people they can do the same because pain doesn't have to be permanent." Above them clouds parted and sunlight flooded the compound, and in that moment something shifted from survival to purpose. The boy's laughter rang across the garden where the shed used to stand, and she looked up from planting hibiscus to watch him chase a butterfly through roses and bird of paradise flowers that had replaced concrete and rust and fear. 3 months had passed since the trial ended, and the garden was finished now with a small stone plaque that read, "Where darkness was let light grow." And every morning she tended the flowers while he helped her learn plant names and watch insects move from petal to petal, their voices filling space that once held only screaming. He was 8 now and attending a new school where he had friends and played football and drew pictures of families that were smiling instead of crying. And though he still saw the therapist weekly, the nightmares came less often because healing isn't instant, but it's possible when people choose to be present instead of absent. His father had restructured everything about how he lived, choosing to be home 3 weeks out of every month and travel only 1 week, hiring people he trusted to manage what used to consume all his time, and every evening they ate dinner together with no phones allowed and no distractions permitted because he'd learned that contracts could be rebuilt but lost time with family stayed lost forever. She started a support group at the local church called Women Who Found Their Voice, where elder abuse survivors gathered to share stories and find strength in numbers. And when she told them, "Silence almost killed me, so don't let it kill you," the words carried weight because they came from someone who'd survived what they were still enduring. The foundation they created was named for both of them, mother and son who'd almost died in a zinc shed while the world looked away, and its mission was to train security guards to recognize abuse and fund legal aid for people who couldn't afford lawyers and provide shelters for those escaping situations where cruelty wore a smile. One afternoon she agreed to a radio interview, and when the host asked, "Why did you stay silent so long?" she answered, "Because I confused endurance with love. I thought bearing suffering proved my strength, but real strength is saying this is wrong and I deserve better." Phone lines flooded with callers sharing their own stories, and one woman crying said, "I'm in a situation now, what do I do?" And she answered without hesitation, "Tell someone today, not tomorrow, today." Evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles politely and kneels respectfully and waits for you to leave before showing its true face. And wealth cannot protect the innocent if the wealthy are too busy to see what's happening in their own homes. This story is for those who confuse endurance with love, who stay quiet thinking it protects others, who suffer alone believing no one will believe them. Your pain is real and your voice matters, so speak. This story is for those who provide but don't protect, who trust blindly because questioning feels disloyal, who miss what's happening right under their noses. Slow down and look closer and verify and act before it's too late. This story is for those who see wrong but fear the cost of speaking, who want to help but worry about consequences. Your courage can save lives because one phone call or one email or one report is all it takes to change everything. 1 year after the discovery, they gathered in the garden to plant an African mahogany tree, and when the boy asked, "Will it grow big?" his father answered, "If we take care of it just like family." And somewhere in Lagos, someone watching this story made a decision to speak up and look closer and refuse silence, because that's how gardens begin to grow where sheds once stood. So let me ask you something that matters. Right now, somewhere in your city, someone is eating from a bowl on a concrete floor while everyone around them stays silent. Someone is enduring what they think is love but is actually slow death. Someone is one phone call away from freedom but doesn't know who to call. What would you have done if you were Emeka? Would you have made that call knowing you might lose everything? What would you have done if you were Memar Adamide? Would you have spoken up sooner or stayed silent to keep the peace? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because this conversation matters more than you think. And if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that evil doesn't always shout, if it showed you that one person's courage can change everything, then do something simple but powerful. Share this story. Tag someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, because we're telling more stories that wake people up to the truth hiding behind closed doors. Your voice in the comments, your share, your subscription, it all creates ripples that reach people suffering in silence right now. Be the ripple. Be the voice. Be the one who refuses to look away. We'll see you in the next story. Stay blessed and stay awake.